At the center of the long family table, under warm golden light, Daniel Hayes leaned forward and spat on his wife's plate, his voice low and cutting as he called her a burden in front of his parents and the woman he planned to replace her with. No one stopped him. No one defended her. To them, Lillian Hayes was nothing more than a quiet, dependent wife who had outlived her usefulness. What Daniel didn't know was that the woman he had just humiliated owned the very company his parents had served for over 3 decades, and as she wiped the edge of her plate with a napkin, her expression calm, almost distant, it became clear this moment was not breaking her. It was ending something far more dangerous. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. That night didn't begin with cruelty. It began with celebration. The Hayes family dining room glowed with polished elegance. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier, and the long mahogany table was dressed for a night meant to impress. Daniel's promotion had been finalized that week, and his parents insisted on hosting a formal dinner to mark the occasion. Lillian sat at the far end of the table, her posture straight, her hands resting lightly in her lap. She wore a simple black dress. No jewelry beyond her wedding ring. Nothing that demanded attention. No one looked at her for long anyway. Daniel stood beside Clara Whitfield, his hand resting at the small of her back as if it belonged there. Clara laughed easily, her voice bright, her presence loud in a way that filled every corner of the room. She didn't hide the fact that she was comfortable, that she expected to be there. Daniel's mother, Eleanor Hayes, watched them with approval. "Now that's what success looks like," she said, lifting her glass. "Confidence, presence, not whatever this is." Her gaze drifted toward Lillian without fully landing. Daniel's father cleared his throat but said nothing. He rarely did when his wife spoke like that. Lillian didn't react. She had learned long ago that reacting only gave them something to sharpen. "Daniel worked hard to get here," Clara added, swirling the wine in her glass. "He deserves a partner who understands the love he's operating on," Daniel smiled. "Exactly." The word hung there longer than it should have. Lillian felt it settle, not as an insult, but as confirmation. This wasn't new. It had just become louder. Dinner was served. Conversation circled around contracts, expansions, and future plans. Daniels spoke as if the world was finally aligning with him, as if everything he touched was something he had built alone. He didn't look at Lillian when he spoke. At one point, he mentioned a pending business proposal. Something tied to a major corporate expansion. "You wouldn't understand the details," he added casually, not even turning his head. "It's complex." Lillian's eyes lifted slightly. "I might understand more than you think," she said, her voice calm. Clara laughed before Daniel could respond. "Oh, please, let's not pretend." Eleanor smirked. "Lillian, dear, you've always had a talent for staying quiet. You should stick to that." The table filled with soft laughter. Daniel didn't stop it. Something inside Lillian shifted, not sharply, not dramatically, just enough. She picked up her fork again and continued eating. The conversation moved on, or at least they thought it did. Clara leaned closer to Daniel, whispering something that made him laugh. His arm tightened around her. Lillian noticed the detail, but it didn't hurt the way it once would have. "Not anymore." "Honestly," Clara said, louder now, "I don't know how you stayed in that situation for so long." Daniel exhaled slowly, as if releasing something he had been holding back for years. "You get used to things. Comfort can look like loyalty if you're not careful." "Or weakness," Eleanor added. Lillian placed her fork down carefully. Not abruptly, not with force, just enough to be deliberate. "Be careful with the words you choose," she said quietly. "They tend to matter more than you expect." Daniel's expression hardened. He turned to face her fully for the first time that evening. "Value?" he repeated. "You want to talk about value?" His voice carried now. The room leaned into it. "You've been living off this family for years, Lillian. Don't start pretending you contribute something you don't." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was expectant. And then he leaned forward. The gesture was small, controlled, but the moment it happened, everything stopped. The spit landed near the edge of her plate, a sharp, quiet sound. You disgust me, Daniel said under his breath. No one moved. No one spoke. The chandelier hummed faintly above them, as if the room itself didn't know how to respond. Lillian looked down at the plate, then she reached for her napkin, slow, precise. She wiped the edge clean. Not a tremor in her hand, not a flicker of emotion on her face. When she looked up, her eyes settled on Daniel's for a brief moment. There was no anger there, no pleading, just stillness. It unsettled him more than anything she could have said. Clara shifted beside him. "Well," she muttered, forcing a laugh. "That was overdue." Eleanor nodded. "Some people only understand their place when it's made clear." Lillian stood. The chair moved back with a soft scrape against the polished floor. "I think I've had enough," she said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't break. She turned without waiting for a response and walked toward the door. No one stopped her. Behind her, the laughter returned. Louder this time, more confident, but none of it followed her. In the hallway, the air felt cooler, quieter. Lillian paused for just a second, her hand resting lightly against the wall. Then she reached into her small clutch and pulled out her phone. The screen lit up. There was one unread message. From a name Daniel had never heard, Jonathan Reed. She opened it. The message was short. "The board is ready. We're awaiting your final authorization." Lillian stared at the words for a moment. Then her lips curved just slightly. Not in triumph. Not in revenge. In certainty, she typed one sentence. "Schedule the meeting. Tomorrow morning." Then she slipped the phone back into her clutch and walked out of the house without looking back. Inside, Daniel lifted his glass, already moving on from the moment he thought he had controlled. He had no idea he had just lost everything that mattered. Lillian didn't go home right away. The night air felt colder than it should have as she stepped out onto the quiet street, the door of the Hayes residence closing behind her with a soft, final click. For a moment, she stood there, her breath steady, her shoulders still relaxed as if nothing had happened. But something had. Inside that house, they had crossed a line that couldn't be walked back. She moved slowly toward her car, her heels echoing against the pavement in a rhythm that matched the quiet clarity forming in her mind. Not anger, not even hurt, not in the way it used to feel. It was something sharper. Recognition. She had spent years explaining away moments like that. Years telling herself Daniel was stressed, that his family didn't mean what they said, that things would change once he reached the next milestone. He had reached it, and nothing had changed. If anything, it had gotten worse. Lillian opened the car door and slid inside, closing it gently behind her. The silence wrapped around her immediately, cutting off the noise of the world outside. For the first time that night, she let her hands rest on the steering wheel without moving. Her phone buzzed again. She already knew who it was. Jonathan Reed didn't send messages twice unless it mattered. She picked up the phone and read the new line. "All board members confirmed. Legal team prepared. We proceed once you authorize." Her thumb hovered over the screen. For years, she had chosen patience over power. She had allowed things to unfold, to give Daniel space to prove he was the man she once believed he could be. Tonight had answered that question. She typed back, her movements calm, deliberate. "Proceed." She didn't hesitate after that. The message sent, and with it, something inside her shifted into place. Lillian started the car and pulled away from the curb, leaving the house behind without looking back. Across town, the Hayes family dinner had already begun to dissolve into something else. Daniel stood near the dining room window, a drink in his hand, his reflection staring back at him through the glass. Clara was speaking with his mother, their voices blending into a low hum behind him. "She'll come crawling back," Clara said casually. "They always do when they realize what they've lost," Eleanor nodded. "She has nowhere else to go. Women like her depend on stability. That's what she's losing tonight." Daniel took a sip of his drink. "She's not coming back," he said. The words came out without emotion, almost bored. Clara glanced at him, a hint of surprise flickering across her face. "That confident?" He shrugged. "I know her. That was the problem." He thought he did. Eleanor stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You've already wasted too much time on that marriage. We need to think about your next move. Your position at the firm is strong, but it's not enough." "Not yet," Daniel nodded. "That's what tomorrow's meeting is for." Clara smiled, leaning into him again. "The Coleman deal." "Exactly." Daniel said. If that goes through, we're not just stable, we're untouchable. Eleanor's eyes lit up slightly. Coleman Industries doesn't partner lightly. Whoever's behind that board doesn't tolerate mistakes. Daniel smirked. Then it's a good thing I don't make them. He turned away from the window, setting his glass down with quiet confidence. By this time next week, he added, everything changes. Across the city, Lillian pulled into a quiet underground garage, beneath a glass-fronted building that rose into the skyline with understated power. There were no flashy signs, no excessive branding, just precision. She parked in a reserved space near a private elevator, the kind that required access most people didn't know existed. As she stepped out of the car, a man standing near the elevator straightened immediately. "Good evening, Miss Hayes." His tone was respectful, not exaggerated, just certain. Lillian gave a small nod. "Evening, Robert." He pressed the elevator button before she reached it, stepping aside as the doors opened. "Mr. Reed is waiting upstairs," he added. I know. She stepped inside, and the doors closed behind her with a soft, controlled sound. As the elevator moved, Lillian leaned back slightly, her gaze fixed ahead. For years, she had kept this part of her life separate. Not hidden out of fear, but out of choice. Out of a belief that love, real love, shouldn't need proof. That belief had cost her more than she had admitted. The doors opened onto a quiet executive floor. Jonathan Reed stood near a long table, lined with neatly arranged documents, his posture straight, his expression composed. He had aged since the last time she saw him in person, but his eyes carried the same sharp awareness. "Lillian," he said, stepping forward. "It's time." She walked toward the table, her eyes moving briefly over the papers. Ownership structures, voting rights, executive authority transfers. Nothing about it was rushed. Everything had been prepared long before tonight. "You waited," Jonathan said carefully, "longer than most would have." "I needed to be sure," she replied. "And now?" She looked at him. "I am." Jonathan nodded once, then turned one of the documents toward her, tapping a section near the bottom. "This initiates the restructuring. Once signed, you'll have direct control over all executive decisions, including employment and contract approvals." Lillian picked up the pen. Her hand didn't shake. Not when she thought about Daniel, not when she remembered the dinner, not even when she recalled the sound of his voice as he dismissed her. If anything, it steadied her. She signed. The ink settled onto the paper, final and clean. Jonathan exhaled quietly. "I'll notify the board. Meeting is set for tomorrow morning. Make sure all relevant parties are present," she said. He understood immediately. "Including Daniel Hayes?" Lillian placed the pen down. "Yes." There was a brief pause. "Does he know?" Jonathan asked. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "No," she said, and then, after a beat, quieter, "But he will." The morning came too quickly for Daniel. He woke up with the faint pressure of a headache, and the lingering taste of last night's wine, still dry in his throat. For a moment, everything felt normal. The ceiling above him, the soft hum of the air conditioning, the quiet weight of routine. Then he reached across the bed. Empty. He frowned, blinking the sleep from his eyes. Lillian should have been there. She always was. Even after arguments, even after long silences, she never left overnight. He sat up, irritation rising faster than concern. "She'll be back," he muttered to himself, already dismissing the thought. He checked his phone. No messages from her, no missed calls. Nothing. A small part of him noticed that. A smaller part still chose to ignore it. Downstairs, the house felt different. Too quiet. His mother was already in the kitchen, dressed sharply as always, her posture rigid with purpose. "Morning," she said without looking up. "You're late." Daniel poured himself coffee. "Where's Lillian?" Eleanor paused, just for a second, then continued arranging something on the counter. "I assumed she went back to wherever she came from." Daniel let out a short laugh. "She doesn't have anywhere else." The words came out easily, automatically. That was what he believed. Eleanor turned slightly, her eyes sharp. "Then she'll come back. People like her always do." Daniel nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. Still, something about the silence in the house lingered longer than it should have. Clara walked in moments later, her heels clicking against the floor, her presence filling the space without effort. She looked comfortable. Too comfortable. "Good morning," she said, brushing a kiss against Daniel's cheek as if it belonged there. Eleanor didn't object. That, more than anything, confirmed what had already shifted. Big day today, Clara added, glancing at Daniel. You ready to impress Coleman? Daniel smirked. They should be ready to impress me. Clara laughed softly. Confidence, I like that. Eleanor folded her arms. Just remember, this isn't one of your smaller deals. Coleman Industries doesn't tolerate arrogance. They expect results. I deliver results, Daniel replied flatly. He set his cup down and checked his watch. I've got the meeting at 11. We'll finalize everything today. Clara tilted her head. And after that? Daniel didn't hesitate. After that, there's nothing tying me down anymore. The words hung in the air. Clear. Final. Eleanor gave a small, approving nod. Good, she said. It's time you stopped carrying Dad weight. Daniel didn't respond. He didn't need to. Across the city, Lillian stood in front of a wide glass window, watching the morning unfold over the skyline. The city moved like it always did. Busy, unaware, unchanged. But for her, everything had shifted. She had slept only a few hours. Not because she couldn't rest, but because her mind had been too clear, too focused. Jonathan stood behind her, reviewing something on his tablet. All board members have confirmed attendance, he said, including the Hayes representatives. Lillian didn't turn. Good. There's one more thing, Jonathan added. Daniel Hayes requested an early review of the proposal. He's expecting a standard approval process. A faint pause. Lillian's reflection in the glass didn't change. Of course he is. Jonathan watched her carefully. Do you want to adjust the meeting format? She shook her head slightly. No. Let it proceed as scheduled. He won't be prepared, Jonathan said. That's not responsibility, Lillian replied. Her voice wasn't cold. It was precise. She turned then, walking toward the long table where the documents from the night before were still laid out. Her hand brushed lightly over one of the folders, not opening it. She didn't need to. She already knew every detail inside. For years, she had watched from the edges, signed what needed to be signed, approved what needed approval, quietly, always quietly, not because she lacked power, but because she believed power didn't need to be proven. Now she understood something else. Silence could be mistaken for weakness, and weakness invited cruelty. Jonathan placed a folder in front of her. These are the final confirmations. Once the meeting begins, all authority transfers will be recognized by the board. Lillian glanced at the papers, then closed the folder without reading. I trust the process. Jonathan nodded. Then everything is in place. There was a brief silence. Lillian, he said carefully, once this starts, there's no reversing it. She looked at him. I'm not trying to reverse anything. Back across town, Daniel stepped into the lobby of Coleman Industries with Clara. At his side, his confidence fully restored. The building was everything he expected. Clean lines, controlled energy, quiet authority. The kind of place where decisions were made without noise. He liked it. Not bad, Clara murmured, glancing around. This is the level we should be operating on. Daniel nodded. We will be. Employees moved through the space with purpose, their attention focused, their expressions neutral. A few glanced in his direction, then looked away just as quickly. It didn't register as unusual to him. He assumed it was recognition, respect. They approached the reception desk where a woman greeted them with a polite smile. Mr. Hayes, Mrs. Whitfield, we've been expecting you. Daniel gave a small nod. I'm here to meet with the chairwoman. Of course, she said smoothly. You'll be escorted upstairs. Clara leaned closer to Daniel as they walked toward the elevators. I've heard she's difficult. Daniel smirked. Everyone is, until they need something. The elevator doors opened, and they stepped inside. As it ascended, Clara adjusted her posture, her confidence sharpening. Just remember, we're offering them growth. They'd be stupid to turn this down. Daniel didn't respond. He was already rehearsing the pitch in his mind. Numbers, expansion, influence, control. The doors opened onto the executive floor. A man in a dark suit stepped forward immediately. Mr. Hayes, this way. Daniel followed without hesitation. Clara stayed close beside him. They walked down a quiet hallway, the air noticeably still, the kind of silence that didn't come from emptiness, but from discipline. At the end of the hall, they stopped in front of a set of double doors. The man turned slightly. They're ready for you. Daniel adjusted his jacket, confident, certain. He reached for the handle and pushed the doors open. and in that exact moment, every assumption he had walked in with stood on the edge of collapse. The room fell silent the moment the doors opened. Daniel stepped in first, his confidence intact, his posture straight, his eyes scanning the long table ahead. Executives were already seated, their expressions composed, unreadable. Clara followed just half a step behind him, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. For a brief second, nothing seemed out of place. Then Daniel's gaze shifted toward the head of the table, and stopped. Lillian sat there, not at the edge, not as a guest, at the head. Still, composed, unmoved. For a moment, Daniel thought it was some kind of mistake, some administrative confusion. Maybe she had come to plead, to embarrass him, to cling to something that was already over. His expression tightened. "What is this?" he said, his voice sharper than intended. Clara glanced between them, confused. "Wait, why is she here?" No one answered immediately. Instead, one of the board members, an older man seated to Lillian's right, calmly closed the folder in front of him and looked at Daniel with quiet patience. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "please take your seat." Daniel didn't move. "I didn't come here to play games," he replied. "I have a scheduled meeting with the chairwoman." Lillian didn't react to his tone. She simply looked at him, her gaze steady, unflinching. "You're in the right place," she said. Her voice was calm, controlled. It didn't match the woman he had left the night before. Clara let out a small, nervous laugh. "Okay, seriously, what's going on? Is this some kind of joke?" Daniel stepped forward now, irritation rising. "Lillian, you need to leave." "This isn't sit down, Daniel." The words cut through the room. Not loud, but final. Daniel froze. Something in the way she said it didn't feel like a request. It felt like authority. He glanced around the table. No one looked surprised. No one looked confused. They were waiting for him. Slowly, reluctantly, Daniel pulled out a chair and sat. Clara hesitated before doing the same, her confidence slipping just slightly. Lillian folded her hands on the table. "Let's begin," she said. One of the executives nodded and turned a page in his folder. As scheduled, today's meeting concerns the proposed expansion partnerships submitted by Mr. Daniel Hayes. Daniel exhaled, forcing his composure back into place. "Right, finally." He leaned forward, placing his presentation folder on the table. "This proposal outlines a strategic growth plan that will benefit both parties." "My firm, we've reviewed your proposal," Lillian interrupted. Daniel stopped mid-sentence. "That's not how this works," he said, his voice tightening. "You review it after I present it." A faint pause. Then Lillian tilted her head slightly. "Is that how you think it works?" The question wasn't aggressive. It was worse. It was measured. Daniel felt something shift under his confidence, just slightly. He ignored it. "Look," he said, leaning back. "I don't know what this setup is, but I didn't come here to be disrespected." A quiet murmur passed between two board members, quickly stilled. Lillian didn't raise her voice. "You came here to secure a partnership," she said, "one that requires approval from this board." She let the words settle. "And from me." Clara's breath caught softly beside him. Daniel frowned. "From you?" Lillian held his gaze. "Yes." The silence stretched. Daniel let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "That's not funny." No one else laughed. He looked around again, searching for something, anything that confirmed his version of reality. He didn't find it. Instead, the same older man from earlier spoke again, his tone polite but firm. "Mr. Hayes, Ms. Lillian Hayes, is the majority shareholder and acting chair of Coleman Industries." The words landed slowly. Daniel didn't react at first. It didn't register. It couldn't. "That's not," he started, then stopped. He looked at Lillian again. Really looked this time. Same calm expression, same stillness. But now something else was there, not weakness, control. "You're what?" he said, his voice lower now. "Majority shareholder," she repeated. "And chair." Clara's hand slipped from Daniel's arm. "That's impossible," she whispered. Lillian didn't respond to her. Daniel leaned forward, his jaw tightening. "You're lying." A faint flicker of something crossed Lillian's eyes. Not anger, not hurt, disappointment. "For years," she said quietly, "you believed you understood value, contribution, power." She paused. "And yet you never asked a single question that might have challenged that belief." Daniel shook his head. No, this doesn't make sense. "You don't even understand business," she finished. He didn't answer, because he had said those exact words before, many times. Lillian reached for a document in front of her and turned it slightly, sliding it across the table. The company's seal caught the light. Her name sat at the bottom, signed, verified, real. Daniel stared at it. The room felt smaller, tighter. "This doesn't change anything," he said finally, though his voice had lost its edge. "I'm still here for a deal." Lillian leaned back slightly. "I know." Her calm unsettled him more than any confrontation could have. "And the answer is no." The words were simple, final. Daniel blinked. "I don't enter into business agreements with individuals who demonstrate a lack of judgment," she said. Her gaze didn't leave his, or respect. The weight of the sentence pressed into the silence. Clara shifted in her seat, her voice small now. "We can renegotiate. There's room for no," Lillian said again. No hesitation, no explanation, just no. Daniel pushed his chair back slightly, frustration rising again, desperate to reclaim control. "You're making a mistake," he snapped. "This deal benefits you." Lillian tilted her head just slightly. "Does it?" The question hung there. Daniel opened his mouth to respond and realized he didn't actually know. Not in the way he thought he did, because for the first time, he wasn't speaking to someone beneath him, he was speaking to someone who didn't need him at all, and that changed everything. Lillian folded her hands again. "This meeting is concluded," she said. No one objected. No one questioned it. They simply began to close their folders, the decision already accepted. Daniel didn't move. He couldn't, because in that moment, one truth pressed harder than anything else. He had walked into this room believing he was about to gain everything, and instead he had just discovered how little he actually had. Daniel didn't move when the room began to empty. Chairs slid back, papers were gathered. Quiet conversations resumed in low tones as board members stood and filed out, each of them nodding respectfully toward Lillian before leaving, respectfully. That word hit harder than anything else. Daniel remained seated, his hands flat against the table, his mind struggling to catch up with what had just happened. Clara stood beside him now, no longer touching him, her arms folded tightly across her chest, as if trying to hold something together. "What just happened?" she whispered. Daniel didn't answer, because he didn't have one. At the far end of the table, Lillian closed her folder with a soft, controlled motion. Jonathan Reed leaned in slightly, murmuring something to her, but she only nodded once. Then she stood, and for the first time since Daniel had walked into the room, she moved toward him. Not quickly. Not aggressively, deliberately. Each step measured, each step final. Daniel forced himself to stand as she approached, his jaw tightening, his pride scrambling to reassemble itself. "You planned this," he said, his voice low but sharp. Lillian stopped a few feet away, her gaze level. "I prepared for it," she replied. "That's not the same thing." "No," she said calmly, "it isn't." Clara stepped forward then, her voice rising slightly. "You humiliated us in there. You could have handled this privately." Lillian didn't even look at her. "This wasn't about you," she said. Clara froze. Daniel exhaled sharply. "You think this gives you power?" Lillian tilted her head just slightly, studying him. "I think it shows you something you refuse to see." Daniel let out a short, bitter laugh. "You hid this. For years. You lied." "I didn't lie," she said. "You never asked." The simplicity of that answer cut deeper than anything else. Because it was true. Daniel looked away for a second, then back at her, his frustration rising again, desperate for something to hold on to. "You think this changes anything between us?" he said. "This doesn't fix what you are." Lillian's expression didn't change. "And what am I?" she asked. The question lingered. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it. Because the words he had used before suddenly felt smaller, weaker. Clara stepped in again, her voice sharper now. "You're still the same woman who couldn't keep up. This doesn't rewrite that." Lillian finally looked at her, not with anger, with clarity. "And you're still the same woman who thought proximity to power made you valuable." Clara's face flushed. Daniel stepped forward, trying to regain control of the moment. "Enough. We're done here." Lillian nodded once. "Yes," she said. "We are." The words landed heavier than he expected. Not dramatic, not emotional, just final. Daniel hesitated, something unfamiliar creeping into his chest. Not fear, not yet, but something close. "You're making a mistake," he said again, softer this time. "You're letting emotion interfere with business." Lillian's gaze held his. "No," she said, "I'm separating them." She stepped past him then, moving toward the door. Daniel turned quickly. "You can't just cut me out like this. My firm depends on approvals you no longer have," she said without stopping. The words hit him like a delayed impact. He hadn't thought that far ahead. Not really. Clara's voice came next, quieter now, edged with something closer to concern. "Daniel, what does she mean?" He didn't answer, because for the first time he wasn't sure. Lillian reached the door, her hand resting briefly on the handle before she paused. She didn't turn back right away. When she did, her expression was calm, but different. "You should review your contracts," she said. "All of them." Daniel frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Start with the ones tied to Coleman," she replied. "You'll understand soon enough." She opened the door and walked out. The silence she left behind felt heavier than anything she had said. Clara turned to Daniel immediately. "What contracts? What is she talking about?" Daniel ran a hand through his hair, his frustration finally cracking into something less controlled. "She's trying to scare us," he said. "That's all this is." Clara didn't look convinced. "Daniel, she just shut down your biggest deal, in front of an entire board that treated her like what?" he snapped. Clara hesitated. "Like she owned the room," she finished quietly. The words hung there. Daniel turned away, grabbing his folder from the table, flipping it open with sharper movements than necessary. His eyes scanned the documents, but the numbers blurred slightly. Something wasn't adding up, not in the way it used to. Clara stepped closer. "Maybe we should talk to legal, just to be safe." Daniel exhaled, his jaw tightening. "Fine. I'll have someone review it." But even as he said it, a small, unwelcome thought pushed through. What if she wasn't bluffing? Across the hall, Lillian walked with steady steps, Jonathan falling into place beside her. "You didn't push as far as you could have," he said quietly. "I didn't need to," she replied. Jonathan nodded once. "They'll start digging now, I know. And when they do, they'll find exactly what they signed." Her tone was calm, certain. They reached the elevator. Jonathan pressed the button, then glanced at her. "Do you want to proceed with the next phase?" Lillian looked ahead, her reflection faint in the polished metal doors. "Yes," she said. The doors opened. As she stepped inside, her phone vibrated again, a new message. From an internal executive office. "Coleman Legal has initiated preliminary enforcement review on Hayes-related contracts." Lillian read it once, then locked the screen. The elevator doors closed, and somewhere behind her the first cracks in Daniel Hayes' world had already begun to spread. The fallout didn't take long. By the time Daniel and Clara stepped out of the building, the air felt different, not physically, but the way people looked at them had changed. Subtle, quiet, but unmistakable. Daniel walked faster than usual, his jaw tight, his phone already in his hand as he dialed his legal advisor. Clara struggled to keep up beside him, her heels clicking faster now, her confidence slipping with every step. "This is a misunderstanding," he said the moment the call connected. "I need you to review every contract tied to Coleman Industries." Immediately, he didn't wait for a response before hanging up. Clara caught up to him just outside the entrance. "Daniel, slow down. We need to think." "I am thinking," he snapped. "No, you're reacting." He turned to her, irritation flashing. "What do you want me to do? Sit back while she plays games with my business?" Clara hesitated, her voice softer now. "I want you to consider that this isn't a game." That stopped him, just for a second. Then he shook his head. "She's bluffing." But even as he said it, the conviction wasn't there, because deep down he knew one thing for certain. Lillian had never been dramatic. She had never made threats she couldn't back up. That was what made this worse. Back at the Hayes residence, Eleanor was already on the phone when Daniel walked in, her voice sharp, controlled, but strained beneath the surface. "Yes, I understand," she was saying. "But we've been with Coleman for over 30 years. This kind of review is unnecessary." She paused, listening, her expression hardened. "I see." She ended the call slowly, her grip tightening around the phone before she set it down. "What happened?" Daniel asked. Eleanor turned to him, her eyes colder than usual. "You tell me." Clara stepped in, trying to smooth the tension. "There's been a misunderstanding at Coleman." "Lillian, don't say her name like that," Eleanor cut in sharply. "None." Daniel frowned. "What did they say?" Eleanor exhaled slowly, choosing her words carefully. The company has initiated a formal review of all long-term employees and their contracts, including your father and me. Daniel's stomach tightened. That's not possible. It's already happening, she replied. The room felt smaller. Clara glanced between them. A review doesn't mean termination. It could just be procedural. Eleanor shook her head. No, this is targeted. Her eyes locked onto Daniel's. What did you do? Daniel felt the question settle into him, heavier than he expected. I didn't do anything, he said, though his voice lacked its usual certainty. Eleanor stepped closer. You humiliated her. The words were direct, unfiltered. Daniel's jaw tightened. That has nothing to do with. It has everything to do with it, she snapped. You don't insult someone in that position and expect no consequences. Clara crossed her arms, defensive. No one knew she was in that position. Eleanor turned sharply. That doesn't change the outcome. Silence followed. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, frustration building again, but now mixed with something else. Pressure. Fine, then we fix it. Eleanor studied him. How? Daniel didn't hesitate. We get ahead of it. We show them we're still valuable. And how exactly do you plan to do that, she asked, when the person making that decision has already made up her mind. The truth of that landed harder than anything else. Across the city, Lillian sat at her desk, reviewing reports as if nothing had changed. But everything had. The emails had already started, internal updates, legal confirmation assessments, each one a quiet step forward. Jonathan stood across from her, tablet in hand. The review process has been initiated. HR is cooperating fully. There's no resistance internally. There won't be, Lillian said. Your name carries weight, he replied. She didn't respond to that. Instead, she opened another file, her eyes scanning the contents briefly before closing it again. Status on Hayes Construction, she asked. Jonathan glanced at his screen. They're already feeling the pressure. 2 pending contracts have been put on hold pending internal review. Lillian nodded once, not satisfied, not pleased, just aware. And their financial exposure? She asked. Significant, Jonathan said, more than they realize. Lillian leaned back slightly, her gaze distant for a moment. Daniel had always believed he was building something solid, but he had never looked closely at the foundation, and now it was beginning to shift. Her phone buzzed again, a message this time. From an unknown number. She opened it. We need to talk, Daniel. Lillian stared at the words for a second, more than necessary. Then she locked the screen without responding. Jonathan noticed the shift. Is everything all right? Yes, she said calmly. But something had changed. Not in the plan, in the timing. Back at the Hayes house, Daniel stood in his office, staring at the documents spread across his desk. Contracts, agreements, financial projections. All of it suddenly felt unstable. His lawyer had called back, and the tone had been different. Careful, measured, concerned. You need to come in, the man had said. There are clauses in these agreements that we need to review in detail. Daniel didn't like the way he had paused before finishing that sentence. It wasn't how he usually spoke. It wasn't how anyone spoke when things were under control. Clara stepped into the doorway, watching him. Well, she asked. Daniel didn't look up. We have a problem. The words felt dove heavier than anything he had said all day. Clara took a step inside. How bad? Daniel finally lifted his head, and for the first time since the meeting his confidence wasn't there. I don't know yet, he admitted, and that uncertainty was far more dangerous than anything Lillian had said. The call from Daniel's lawyer came sooner than expected. Daniel stood by the window of his office, staring out at the city that had always felt like something he was steadily conquering. Now it looked different, distant, uncertain. His phone buzzed in his hand. He answered immediately. Well, he said. There was a pause on the other end, longer than it should have been. That depends on how honest you want me to be, the lawyer replied. Daniel's grip tightened slightly. Start with the truth. Another pause. Your contracts with Coleman Industries are structured in a way that gives them far more control than you realized. Daniel frowned. That's standard. They're the bigger party. No, the lawyer said carefully. This isn't standard. Daniel felt something cold settle into his chest. What do you mean? The lawyer continued, there are clauses tied to performance guarantees, compliance, and ethical conduct. Clauses that allow them to suspend, terminate, or reclaim assets if certain conditions are violated. Daniel's jaw tightened. That's normal legal protection. Yes, the lawyer said, but the thresholds in your agreements are unusually strict. Daniel turned away from the window, pacing now. Get to the point. The lawyer exhaled quietly. If Coleman chooses to enforce those clauses, they could dismantle your current operations faster than you can stabilize them. The words didn't land all at once. They spread, slowly, like a crack forming beneath something that had always seemed solid. That's not going to happen, Daniel said. You don't know that, the lawyer replied, and based on what I'm seeing, they've already initiated internal reviews. Daniel stopped pacing. What does that mean for me? It means, the lawyer said, you need to assume you're under scrutiny. Every contract, every partnership tied to Coleman. All of it. Daniel didn't respond immediately, because for the first time, he didn't have a counter. Come into the office, the lawyer added. We need to go through this in detail. The call ended. Daniel lowered the phone slowly, his reflection faint in the glass of the window. He barely recognized the expression staring back at him. Clara watched from the doorway. Well, she asked. Daniel didn't turn right away. They can shut us down, he said finally. Clara's expression shifted. What? They can pull contracts, freeze partnerships. If they push hard enough, he trailed off. Clara stepped closer. If they push hard enough, what? Daniel turned then, his voice tighter. We lose everything. Silence filled the room. Clara shook her head slightly, disbelief written across her face. No, that doesn't make sense. They wouldn't risk that kind of disruption over something personal. Daniel let out a short, humorless laugh. You think this is personal? Clara hesitated. Then what is it? She asked. Daniel didn't answer, because he wasn't sure anymore. Back at the Hayes house, Ella sat at the dining table with a stack of documents spread out in front of her. Her reading glasses rested low on her nose, her expression tense as she scanned each page. Her husband sat across from her, unusually quiet. They've flagged our department, she said finally. For what? He asked. Compliance review, she replied. 30 years of work, and suddenly they need to recess our contributions. Her voice carried a controlled edge, but beneath it was something else. Fear. That's not a coincidence, he said. No, Eleanor agreed. It isn't. She set the papers down and looked up, her gaze sharp. This is retaliation. Across the city, Lillian stood in a quiet conference room, reviewing the same reports from a different perspective. Jonathan sat across from her, flipping through a digital file. Initial findings are already surfacing, he said. Nothing catastrophic yet, but enough to justify further action. Lillian nodded once. She didn't rush, didn't push. She understood timing. Keep it procedural, she said. No shortcuts. Jonathan glanced at her. Even now? Yes. Her tone left no room for interpretation. This isn't about punishment, she continued. It's about accountability. Jonathan studied her for a moment, then nodded. Understood. Lillian closed the folder in front of her. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Daniel. We need to talk. This is getting out of hand. She stared at the words. For a brief moment, something flickered beneath her calm. Not hesitation, memory. Then it was gone. She placed the phone face down on the table. Jonathan noticed. Are you going to respond? Not yet. He nodded, understanding more than she said. There's something else, he added. One of the board members flagged a secondary issue. It involves Clara Whitfield. Lillian's gaze lifted slightly. What kind of issue? Jonathan turned the tablet toward her. Discrepancies in her professional background. Inflated credentials. Possibly falsified experience. Lillian read the summary in silence. Then she leaned back slightly. Verified? She asked. Preliminary, Jonathan said, but the indicators are strong. Lillian nodded slowly. Not surprised, just aware. Keep it contained for now, she said. No external moves until we confirm. Jonathan studied her again. You're giving them time? I'm giving myself clarity, she corrected. Back in his office, Daniel stared at his phone again. No response from Lillian. Not even acknowledgement. The silence felt louder than any argument. Clara moved closer, her voice quieter now. Maybe you should go see her. Daniel shook his head. Not like this. Then how? She asked. Because right now, she's making decisions that affect everything we've built. Daniel's jaw tightened. Everything he had built. The phrase echoed in his mind. And for the first time, it didn't feel entirely true. His phone buzzed again. A new notification. Email. Subject line: Notice of contract review. Immediate attention required. His stomach dropped. He opened the message, scanning the contents quickly. Formal language. Legal tone. Clear implications. He read one line twice. Due to concerns regarding compliance and professional conduct, Coleman Industries reserves the right to suspend active agreements pending full review. Daniel lowered the phone slowly. Clara watched him. What is it? He didn't answer immediately, because now it wasn't a possibility anymore. It had already started, and somewhere across the city, the woman he had dismissed as powerless was quietly deciding how far it would go. Daniel went to Lillian's office that evening without calling first. He told himself it was strategy, a direct conversation, a chance to stop things before they became impossible to fix. But beneath that excuse was something he didn't want to name: fear. The Coleman building was quieter after hours. The lobby lights had dimmed, and the usual movement of employees had thinned into silence. Still, security recognized his name from the earlier meeting and made a call upstairs before letting him through. That bothered him. Not because they checked, because they didn't ask Lillian if he could enter. They asked someone else, whether he was allowed. The answer came back after nearly a minute. Ms. Hayes will see him for 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Daniel felt the words like an insult, but he swallowed it and stepped into the elevator. When the doors opened on the executive floor, Jonathan Reed was waiting. His face carried no surprise, no sympathy either. "This way," Jonathan said. Daniel followed him down the hall, his footsteps sounding louder than they should have. Every office door they passed was closed. Every glass wall reflected a version of him that looked less certain than the one he had walked in with that morning. At the end of the hall, Jonathan stopped. "She asked that Miss Whitfield not be present for this conversation," he said. Daniel stiffened. "Clara isn't here." Jonathan's expression didn't change. Good. The door opened. Lillian stood near the window, dressed in the same simple elegance Daniel had always mistaken for lack of ambition. The city glowed behind her, all steel and glass and moving lights. For years he had thought she didn't belong in rooms like this. Now the room seemed built around her. She turned when he entered. Daniel. His name sounded different in her voice now. Not affectionate. Not wounded. Finished. He stepped inside and Jonathan closed the door behind him, leaving them alone. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Daniel had rehearsed this in the car. He had prepared sentences, explanations, accusations, even apologies, though he hated admitting that part. But facing her now, he found the words didn't fit. "You could have told me," he said finally. Lillian looked at him calmly. When? He frowned. "What do you mean, when? When would you have listened?" she asked. The question landed cleanly. He looked away, irritated because he had no easy answer. "You made me look like a fool," he said. "No," she replied. "You did that yourself." His jaw tightened. "That dinner was wrong." "I know that." Lillian's face didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened. "You spat on my plate, Daniel." He swallowed. For the first time, the memory didn't come back as power. It came back ugly. Small. "I was angry," he said. "You were cruel." The correction was quiet. He looked at her then, really looked, and saw no pleasure in her expression, no victory, no joy in watching him struggle. That unsettled him more than revenge would have. "I came here to fix this," he said. "The contracts, my parents, my firm. We don't have to let it go this far." Lillian turned slightly, resting one hand on the edge of her desk. "There it is," she said. "What? You didn't come because you were sorry. You came because the consequences finally reached you." Daniel flinched, barely. "That's not fair." "No," she said. "What happened at that table wasn't fair. This is process." He stepped closer. "Process? You're using your company to punish me. I'm using my authority to protect it," she said. "From poor judgment. From reputational risk. From people who confuse access with ownership." Daniel's face tightened. "You're talking about Clara. I'm talking about you." The words stopped him. Lillian walked to her desk and opened a folder. She didn't hand it to him. She only looked at it as if reminding herself that facts mattered more than emotion. "Your firm has pending obligations tied to Coleman subsidiaries. Your proposal relied on assumptions you didn't verify. Your parents' departments are under review because compliance flagged outdated practices. Clara's background is being checked because her name appeared in support materials. She may not have been qualified to submit. Daniel stared at her. This wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't personal revenge dressed up as business. It was worse. It was real. You already had all this ready, he said. I had the right to review it, Lillian replied. I chose not to exercise that right publicly until you made silence impossible. He exhaled slowly, his anger cracking into something more desperate. What do you want from me? Lillian closed the folder. Nothing. The answer was too fast, too clean. Daniel blinked. Nothing? I wanted respect, she said, years ago. I wanted partnership. I wanted honesty. I wanted the man I married to see me before he needed me. Her voice stayed steady, but the words carried weight. Now I don't want anything from you. Daniel's expression shifted then. For the first time, regret appeared without anger covering it. Lillian, she raised one hand slightly. No. Just that, a boundary. Small, quiet, absolute. He stopped speaking. She reached into another drawer and took out a cream-colored envelope, already sealed. I had Jonathan prepare this, she said. It's not a lawsuit. It's not a threat. It's a formal separation notice from my attorney. You'll have time to respond through counsel. Daniel stared at the envelope. The room seemed to tilt slightly. You're divorcing me. Lillian held it out. You ended long before I put it on paper. He didn't take it at first. Then slowly, his hand lifted. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. Lillian stepped back. Your 10 minutes are over. Daniel looked at her, stunned by the calmness of it. By the fact that she didn't yell, didn't plead, didn't ask him to understand. She had already survived needing that from him. He turned toward the door, the envelope in his hand, but just before he left, his phone buzzed, then buzzed again and again. He looked down 3 messages, one from his lawyer, one from his father, one from Clara. His lawyer's message was at the top. Call me immediately. Coleman's review found something. This may affect more than the contracts. Daniel's lawyer found the issue before midnight. It wasn't fraud. It wasn't a scandal big enough for headlines. It was something quieter and more damaging. Daniel's firm had used Coleman-backed projections in investor materials without proper authorization, and Clara's name appeared on supporting documents that listed credentials she had not fully earned. The review didn't destroy them in one dramatic blow. It simply removed every false support beam they had been standing on. Within 2 weeks, Coleman suspended the partnership pipeline. Daniel's investors paused funding. Clara was placed under professional review by her own employer, then quietly resigned before the findings became public. Daniel's parents kept their jobs only through a negotiated transition, but their influence inside Coleman was gone. They were not thrown into ruin. They were simply returned to reality, where loyalty to a company did not excuse cruelty at a dinner table. The separation moved through lawyers, not shouting. Lillian refused private meetings that were not documented. She signed nothing under pressure. She gave Daniel what the law required and nothing more. When his attorney tried to frame the situation as a misunderstanding between spouses, Jonathan Reed answered with dates, contracts, emails, and the formal record of the review. There was no revenge hidden inside it, just proof. Daniel tried once more to speak to her outside the legal process. He waited in the lobby of Coleman Industries on a rainy afternoon, looking smaller than he used to, his expensive coat damp at the shoulders. When Lillian stepped out of the elevator, the receptionist stood a little straighter. A junior executive paused mid-sentence. People made room for her without noise. Daniel saw it then, not the money, not the title, the respect. It was the thing he had taken from her, and the thing she had never needed to beg for. Lillian, he said softly. She stopped, but she did not come closer. I didn't know, he said. That was the truth he had been holding like an excuse. Lillian looked at him for a long moment. No, she said. You didn't, but you didn't need to know I owned Coleman to treat me like your wife. He lowered his eyes. For once, he had no answer ready. I'm sorry, he whispered. She heard him. She even believed that some part of him meant it, but sorry was not a bridge. Not after years of silence, comparison, betrayal, and that final dinner, where he had tried to make her small in front of everyone. I hope you become better than the man you were at that table, she said, but I won't be the place where you practice. Then she walked past him. Not fast, not cold, just free. A year later, the Coleman name was stronger than it had been in decades. Lillian led the company with the same quiet discipline she had carried in her marriage, only now her silence was no longer mistaken for weakness. She expanded employee protections, cleaned up outdated departments, and built a leadership program for people who had been overlooked because they did not know how to perform confidence loudly enough. Daniel rebuilt slowly, far from Coleman's influence. Clara moved on when his status disappeared. Eleanor learned to speak more carefully, not because she suddenly became kind, but because consequence had taught her what pride never could. Lillian no longer watched any of it closely. On the anniversary of that dinner, she returned to the same restaurant alone, not to suffer, not to remember Daniel. Because she wanted to take back the room in her own mind, she ordered a quiet meal, removed her wedding ring from a small velvet pouch, and placed it on the table for the last time before sending it to her attorney with the final divorce file. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the glass. For years, Lillian had hidden her power because she wanted to be loved without it. In the end, she learned something harder and cleaner. The right love would never require her to shrink first. She did not win because she was richer. She won because she finally stopped waiting for people who had nothing but contempt to tell her she was enough. If you were in Lillian's place, would you have walked away the same way? Share your thoughts in the comments, and stay with us for more stories about dignity, betrayal, and the quiet strength people never see coming.